Good morning. I think it's good morning for most of you. So my name is Pramod Varma. I've been the chief architect of much of India's digital transformation journey. And I'll give you a very top level view, macro view of what happened in the last 15 years in the subcontinent. And what's happening around the world because of, especially in the developing nations, global south, much of global south. And some of the effort, you can see the pattern unraveling as we do more and more project. The systems are going decentralized, systems are going into interconnected, protocol-driven, complex networks. All of them necessitates very, very deep thinking and further push in terms of cryptographic techniques, privacy, by design, what are the privacy techniques and security techniques that can allow individuals to control their data, money, and everything else, but continue to transact safely. There's a lot of thinking that needs to go, and part of that has been implemented, and it's an ongoing journey for us. And a lot of us look forward to work all of you are doing so that we can learn and implement the best practices when it comes to data, money, assets, and so on in a decentralized world. So give me about maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes or something. I'll go through a macro. I might go a little bit fast because we've done a lot in the last 15 years. And but I think your technologies, you should get a good sense of it very quickly. So we looked at when we're reimagining digital economy for 1 billion people, and India's population is 1.4 billion people, so the most populous nation on earth. If people who don't know about India's demography, we have 22 official languages under the constitution. There is no single language, and we have in practice we have several hundred languages. So several hundred languages, diverse culture, food, diverse, weather conditions, diverse literacy rates, diverse religious diversity. So India is like a subcontinent, or a continent with multiple countries, but nevertheless held together by a single constitution. So it creates two complex problems for us. One, the scale. The scale is 1.4 billion. It's large, and the diversity. So if you combine diversity and scale, it creates quite complex scenario playing out. And when we looked at the digital economy, we found 3 key pillars that would have to be underlying, foundational capabilities have to be created to enable individuals and SMEs to participate in the betterment of their life and participating in opportunities, accessing opportunities and products and services, accessing knowledge, and so on. So the 3 key pillars are identities as a key piece. Doesn't mean government issued identity, don't get me wrong. It just simply means identities, various types of identities. It can be anonymous identities, it can be purpose-driven identities, it can be privately provisioned identity, or it can be an attested identity from a government system as well, quite like SyncPass or things like that you use there. So it's a combination. It's a combination of, and this is not an identity just for people, it's also identities for companies, entities, and identities for things, such as vehicles and properties, and so on. So identities play a very key role in creating trustworthy digital transactions and end-to-end trust and everything else. So we focus a lot, and we focused last 15 years a lot on identity, continue to focus on. And the second element is what I have. The first one is who I am, and the second one is what I have. How can we ensure individuals and SMEs continue to create their assets in their control? And assets can be money, regular money, digital money, tokenized assets, real world assets, digital assets, all kinds of credentials. And we are very, very high on credentials. How can we ensure that all data and all achievements, all affiliations are credentialed and given back to the people so that it turns into an economic asset for the people and not held in some platform and, and actually unusable data it becomes just data to use it in a platform and not necessarily a portable asset for the individual to use it. So we are very, very consciously flipping the idea that assets should be owned by the people and by the businesses who transacted, and they should have full control over it. So who I am, what I have, and then the most important thing, what do I do with it? What do I do with my identity? What do I do with my assets and so on? That's where we are focusing on a lot more what we call a transactional web or the decentralized transactional systems. We could continue to have centralized transaction system, nothing wrong, but India is actually pushing quite hard. I'll tell you why, in terms of more decentralization of transaction systems as well. So these three are very key pillars of whatever you do in the economy. For foundationally, I'm not talking about private innovation, I'm talking about foundational infrastructure layer that we need to think about. And the way we think about it, a lot of times when we build this infrastructure, public infrastructure, we are quite heavy users of open source. We pretty much built everything on open source. So the work many of you might be doing, many of the international open source effort, we actually use it. A lot of effort we do are open sourced as well. But just open source assets are not good enough. We also need to create a runtime and runtime infrastructure, very lightweight infrastructure to move money, or a lightweight infrastructure for issuance of identities, lightweight infrastructure for authorization, authentication, and so on. But real value get unlocked when markets, public and private innovation happen on top of that. And I call it public and private innovation because private innovation alone won't cut it, because there will be, especially in countries like India, a long tail of the users whose revenue, very little revenue. So private companies don't really go to the last mile or the last set of people. So it should be, in a large society like India, it should be a combination of public and private innovation, but innovation using the underlying building blocks and interoperable building blocks built using open source. So that's the three layers we have. So just going back in time, in 2009, when some of us quit our private entrepreneurial role and joined to build national infrastructure, various infrastructure, India's situation was pretty bad. And India was one of the least banked nation on earth. We were 17% banked. 83% of the people didn't have anything to do with banking. But India is also a very welfare state. India gives a lot of welfare subsidies to people because of the large pyramid in nature. Not all of them are on top of the pyramid. Very large section of the population depend on government subsidies like food guarantee, so nobody can go hungry. Right to education. Women who are pregnant, giving them subsidies to make sure they go to a hospital and actually deliver. Farmer subsidies, for water subsidies, cooking gas and stuff. A lot of subsidies go in form of goods or in terms of money. But the problem was that it had very, very high leakage, obviously, because of there's no identity, nobody had an identity, nobody had a bank account. So the only way to give the subsidy is through a large, complex supply chain of intermediaries. And invariably, in developing nations, the intermediaries have such asymmetric power, they tend to steal away a lot of that. And that it's not a good thing for a country that is spending the 2.5% of the GDP in subsidies. Half of the money leaking out of $50 billion is not a joke. That's a lot of money for India, right? But this is 2020 results. So this is a report from Bureau of International Settlements in Basel. They studied India's 10-year journey in financial inclusion and said that something extraordinary happened in India. And that is that India would have taken 5 decades, should have taken 5 decades to get from sub 20% banking penetration to above 80% banking penetration. To get from 20 to 80, India should have, given the size and complexity of India, using the GDP curve, they plotted saying it should have taken 5 decades. But India merely took less than 7 years to actually do this. Within 7 years, 1 billion people had digital identities, 1 billion people had bank account, 1 billion people had mobile connection. So this dramatic shift, non-linear shift, happened because of the underlying investment, digital infrastructure investment India made. And India also, at the same time, during that decade, India also laid world's largest direct-to-person payment transfer mechanism. Now, this is not P2P. This is G2P. That means governments and CSR, large CSRs, NGOs, and so on, can actually disburse money to an individual using their identity as the financial address. That's very, very powerful, because now you can move from one place to other place. You can move from one bank to another bank, irrespective of who you bank with, where you live. Your entitlements, let's say pensions and scholarships and subsidies, will always come to you. That's because money is being disbursed to your unique identity as a financial address, and that gets routed automatically to your real, wherever you're banking, whoever, could be a money wallet as well, mobile wallet. And this infrastructure currently runs for about 960 million people. 1 billion people roughly is actually connected to this infrastructure, who can receive money instantly from government, cutting down all the middle layers at one shot. About 1,000 programs, benefits programs, have been moved onto this. India has saved about 35 billion, 37 new numbers, have like 1%, 1.5% of GDP has been saved because of this, because of the leakage has been cut out. And best part is, when you invest in general purpose infrastructure, user-centric infrastructure, it comes in handy when shit hits a fan. And that's exactly what happened when COVID hit, which nobody could predict. But the first lockdown was horrendous for Indians, because of the markets had to be shut down, work has to be shut down, and most of the Indians depend on the state to get food and work and so on. So it's not easy for a country like India to lock down for 2-3 months. And during that lockdown, when much of the countries were writing checks or struggling to give subsidies, including US and Europe, Indians moved $4.5 billion instantly to people's bank accounts. So two things did not stop during COVID lockdown: is flow of money and flow of food. Okay, it's two things that did not stop in India. And it might be hard to imagine the complexity, because Singapore is small, but people who have lived in India, seen the complexity for 1.4 billion people. It's really, really powerful to have an infrastructure like this that allows instantly to readjust. For example, last few months ago, there was a horrendous flood in one of the states. Again, when it happens, you can do what's called a targeted benefit transfer instantly to the people. And that's a really, really powerful infrastructure to have. And this started with identity. I won't talk much about it. It's 1.4 billion people today have digital identity. It's used about 70 million times online, and roughly same number or maybe double the number offline, which we don't know, because it can be used decentralized. The identity is decentralized, issuance is centralized, but authentication can be either centralized or decentralized. So we don't know. And this system, computationally, was one of the most complex computational system in the world. Had to do trillions and trillions and trillions of, like 1,000 trillion biometric matches and all that thing on our compute grid, built completely using open source. And the cost of the entire system was $1 per person. That's it. And this is equal, when UK tried this, is about 150 pounds per identity. Obama, when he estimated during his term, doing a digital identity for US, the cost was about $100 to $120, and India achieved this entirely with $1 per person. So it was quite, ROI was pretty straightforward for India to do. And it also created the largest electronic KYC. And I want to go back and tell about eKYC. What happened is 9/11, when 9/11 hit US, the entire financial industry tightened their noose. PMLA, FATF, all the norms were tightened, and India is part of the global, global coalition. So if we cannot dilute money laundering rules and KYC norms, if you dilute, we might get punished by the large economy. So we don't do it. But the problem with, and in 2008 and 9, again, we had the financial crisis. So by 2009, Indians couldn't get bank account for obvious reasons, because the cost of KYC kept going up, and banks' cost of KYC, just a KYC, just acquiring a customer, was about $10 to $15, just acquiring. And after all that thing, if the customer is going to save $5, because most people can only save $5, $10 in the bank account, it is not viable. The business is simply not viable. You spend $15, people put $5 deposit, $10 deposit. Which bank wants to do a business like that? It's completely loss-making business. So nobody wanted to do business. So what happened with digital identity is that the cost of KYC came down in the banking sector from $10 to $15 to 10 cents. And in capital market, mutual fund and stock market, KYC cost was about $20, and it came down to 10 cents. So the KYC, the cost collapsing of the cost allows expansion of the business. Remember, that's what happened to Indians. So everybody got bank account very, very easily. Because you could do paperless, presence-less, instant bank account opening at a fraction of a cost. And that allowed banks to expand the market. Same thing happened in telecom. Telecom expanded from under 40% expansion to 4G network to 93%. Now 5G is everywhere in the country. And India is one of the lowest per GB mobile data cost. It's about 10 cents now. It's not even 70.17. It's actually 10 cents. So it's very, very low. And one of the other things we did is credentialing. Digital credentialing. And many of you are working in the digital credentialing, zero knowledge proof, and all that effort. We started this very early effort of credentializing certificates and document, academic certificate, health certificates, trade licenses, and all that thing. In 2015, today we have about 7 billion verifiable credentials in a locker called DigiLocker, which is a wallet. De facto wallet for Indians have it, and 300 million plus people use it. And it's also what it really is doing is many businesses today onboard their customers paperless, because they can actually verify who you are and what you claim. Are you an engineer? Are you a high school graduate? Have you been vaccinated? Have you been done? All these very claims are now instantly verifiable. Still early. We have a long way to go, but I think we have made tremendous progress in this field as well. And then, of course, we digitize money, digital payments. India was exceptionally cash heavy, continue to be cash heavy. But, and one of the worst part was that in 2016, even in 2016, we had less than 50 million people doing digital payments out of 1.4 billion people. Remember, out of 1.4 billion people, literally only like 3% used to do digital payments. Everybody else cash. In 2024, 500 million people do digital payments. So from 50, 10x growth. And the idea called UPI was a brilliant design of a combination of a 1.5-page protocol, UPI protocol, that allowed many companies to build real-time payment experiences. So we have Phone Pay, Google Pay, Amazon Pay, WhatsApp, everybody is here. A few hundred apps actually, but few of them dominating, and 300 plus banks. Everyone is interoperable. So that means we don't have to ask whether if the merchant is using the same app or my daughter is using the same app. I can transfer money using any app from any bank to any other app to any other bank, all real time. And this started in 2016 Last month, we did 15.5 billion transactions. That's MasterCard worldwide volume. Remember, monthly volume. Okay. So this has just taken off, one of the largest in the world, real-time payment system in the world now. But the best part about this is that it's not just meant for smartphone people. The same real-time payment is actually accessible by feature phone users with a limitation of amount, because their amount is limited in what they can do in feature phone. And best part is that it can be used by people who have no phones. And remember, Indians, we still have 300 million people in India who have no phones, mostly women, older women, and so on. So how do they get their pension? How do they get their entitlements and so on? So they get to assisted model. So Indian post office personnel, for example, or a banking personnel comes to their doorstep with a small handheld device, and where they can actually transact using their fingerprint, literally real time. And but again, we have calibrated the amount limitation so that they don't get big amounts transferred and by mistake and so on. So this is extremely very inclusive design that allows all the entire India to actually start transacting. So we have very, very large number because of that. We are also digitizing businesses. If you India, if you watch, taxation is unified, markets are unified, logistics, transport is unified. That means the entire nation we can actually drive with a single FASTag. And this is because a large nation, okay? Again, remember, it's not a small nation, so very, very complex. So doing this across federal system, we are a very federal system. States have their own autonomy. They can do whatever they want. So it creates a lot of push and pull to be able to do this, but it allowed businesses. That's why our GDP growth continue to be very, very high, and tax collection is even higher than GDP growth. And we are also giving the data back to the people. Very interesting architecture. Unlike the open finance architecture you see, India's open finance architecture is fully decentralized, driven by a set of protocols that allow any number of players to allow consent, money transfer equivalent. I can do a consented data transfer. That means I can harness all my business financial transactions like bank data, my mutual fund data, my tax data, my utility bill payment data. I can harness that using my consent and actually download it and keep it in my personal wallet for PFM and other apps, or I can actually transfer it for lending, for example. And we have hundreds of startups who are building on top of these APIs. By the way, everything I said so far, identity, payments, data sharing, credentialing, it's all API based. That means many, many innovators can actually build solutions using these underlying APIs. And one of the biggest solution being rolled out by the market, not by government, by the market, is actually access to capital, lending. Because India's lending is quite broken. Only big guys get lending. Small guys find it hard to get because what they say can't be verified. Who they are can't be verified. And the cost of giving is so high, the interest rate is not good enough to recover the cost. So most of the time, the banks would say, no, I won't give it to small people at all because it's just not viable. Today with digital, you can actually plummet the cost and increase the trust, decrease the cost, and expand the market. That's what's happening. And then I'll go really fast now. This is the last stage. So I talked about who I am, identities, what we have, assets, data, credentials, money as assets. And then what do you do with it is a transaction economy. And if you're looking at India's transaction economy, you would see it's very, very fragmented. E-commerce, even with the biggest e-commerce giants playing out, India only has 7 to 8% of e-commerce. B2C, B2B is even broken. Biggest mobility taxi booking apps in the world could only penetrate up to 2 to 3% of India's mobility space. Very, very large space. Barely number of transactions in the large apps are really, really small. So what happens is much of the India's economy, it is still fragmented, inefficient, high cost. So one of the reasons is that because we continue to imagine a two-sided marketplace whenever we want to actually solve economic contracting between consumers and providers. If you have a homestay and somebody wants to book homestay, we imagine an Airbnb. Very natural. That's what almost we have seen. And that's why we are creating this siloed, two-sided, non-interoperable marketplace. The problem with that is that India's diversity and size is so large that they all end up being single-digit growth. The whole market, everything else is fragmented. We are pushing towards what's called an internet-like architecture, a decentralized, multi-platform, interoperable network topology, from a platform-centric topology to a network-centric topology. And that is driven by an open source effort called Beckn Protocol, BECKN, beckenprotocol.io. You can go check it out. It's actually a multi-sectoral, it's a general purpose protocol like HTTP that can move any economic resource. You can actually discover any economic resource, you can negotiate on price, and you can actually contract, and you can actually fulfill. And this is actually gave rise to India's first decentralized mobility network. And India went live multiple cities today. And by the way, we have a mobility network in Gambia in Africa and in Amsterdam in Europe. So US, we are expecting a network to come in Minnesota, Twin Cities. So we are starting to see a global movement of decentralized transaction networks, open transaction networks, from platform-centric world now moving towards a network-centric world, which is what internet taught us, frankly. And this one really grew in about 2 years. It's actually less than 2 years. It's already crossed 100 million US dollars earning, 54 million rides, half a million drivers, and so on. So drivers love this because the commission structures have been collapsed dramatically because there's no single platform that can hostage them. There is many platforms, many apps. They're all interoperable through a protocol. So no single platform can say, I'm going to take out 30% margin out of you because there's nowhere else to go. So we are demonopolizing some of this platform play as well. But for us, it's less to do with demonopolizing, unlike Europe and other places. For us, it's mostly expansion and defragmentation of the whole economy. We have also set up last year a not-for-profit collective by the market collective called Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC.org. If you go into ONDC.org, it is actually a multi-sectoral, multi-platform open commerce network. So we have logistics, mobility, financial transactions, food delivery, all decentralized. That's interesting way to think about for technologists. And this is also grown in a year. We already crossed 100 million orders. And we do about 12 million plus orders a month. But again, it's a set of open APIs. ONDC is not a platform. No transactions go through ONDC. There is no centralized system. ONDC is a facilitator for SLAs, consumer guarantees, dispute resolutions. They come up with rules, they facilitate. Transactions always happen peer-to-peer. Okay, using Beckn protocol. And who builds these platforms? Entrepreneurs. We have hundreds of entrepreneurs now building on top of these APIs, not only in India, actually around the world. And we also have an energy network. So remember, Beckn protocol is a domain agnostic resource discovery, negotiation, contracting, and fulfillment protocol. So a set of energy startups came together to create decentralized energy transaction web. Energy web, it's called Energy Web. And that's also live. Quite large number of transactions are starting to happen. And India's energy policies are starting to be friendly for allowing micro grids. If you have a solar roof panel, you can actually trade excess energy on the open market now, but to a limit. So grids, we are starting to allow those policies that allow individuals and small micro grids to discover each other and trade energy at peak time, for example. And that's what these guys are doing. So they're creating a programmable layer using Beckn protocol. We have 60 plus projects around the world, large community on Beckn protocol. And we also started another decentralized effort. Jay is very familiar, and called Finternet. Some of you, the Silence Labs folks, are actually part of the creation of this. This is very new. This is about decentralized assets. So we talked about Beckon is about decentralized transactions, and this is about assets to make sure individuals and SMEs harness all their assets, real world assets, digital assets, money, data as assets, credentials as assets, and so on. And the paper was published in Washington, and it's very new. We have sandbox going. You can look at finternetlab.io, and this is about creating an interconnected financial ecosystem that puts individuals and businesses at the center of it. And the implications of if the open source community, some of you are in there, can pull this off globally. It's a universal effort. It's not nothing to do with India. It's a global effort. If you can pull it off, we will have 8 billion people, 250 million businesses, especially in global south, starting to participate first time in financial transactions with their control. It's a very, very powerful notion. It allows highly programmable innovations as well. So we also see a lot of potential innovators, startups to play out on top of this. So this is the third generation of crypto movement. The first one was completely outside, mostly focused on money. And the second one was banks and so on starting to take cryptographic technique, trying to create a private shared ledger, sometimes a misnomer, but nevertheless, they do that. But they also hit the wall. And now Finternet is to create actually a public user-centric ledger that allows everyone to participate rather than multiple walled gardens, but in a with regulatory norms on the floor. So that's the real essence of it. But if you want to summarize, I want to summarize it. Much of our work has been a combination of public rails, mostly driven out of standards, thin APIs, really lightweight infrastructure, but hundreds of private innovation. India went from 1,000 startups in 2016 to about 150,000 startups today. So it's really an expansion of when the market gets opened up, when people can be formalized and everybody can participate in economy, and the cost of participation, cost of identity verification, cost of verifying who you are and what you do becomes exceptionally low. Startups now can actually expand the market beyond the top 50, 100 million people to 500, 600 million people. After that, it gets really hard to the next last 500 million people, but nevertheless, it's still a 10x growth that you're seeing, right? So imagine what a lot of us have been thinking about is quite similar to what physical infrastructure did to societies. Railways, roads, parks, libraries, any society tend to build public infrastructure. But when it came to digital, other than internet and telecom networks, we really didn't build much digital infrastructure. Now we are pushing that boundary in terms of identity infrastructure, asset infrastructure, transaction infrastructure, set of protocols and standards, but exceptionally powered with a user at the center, giving power back to the user. But all this work, we are very thankful to a lot of you, by the way, and the community, cryptographic community and privacy community and security community, because no way we can actually decentralize and create protocols and still put user at the center without a deep privacy and security care built into the protocols itself. And that necessitates a lot of cutting edge technology and continue to push many of those technologies as we do Finternet and Beckon around the world. We will look forward to your contribution and look forward to your advancement so that we can leverage them and protect the users from any harm. That every technology has something that will go wrong. So we have to make sure that it minimized and the value is maximized. So we look forward to your support and thank you so much for giving me the chance today.
Thank you, Dr. Pramod. Do we have any questions?
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. Could you say a bit about the security of the data and about any data leakage? on the ID?
Yeah. So I think one of the principles that the two principles that we have applied, technology principles that we have applied across all the projects is one, minimization of data capture. So if you look at the identity system, it has 4 attributes. 4. The most minimal identity system, government identity system in the world. Okay, your own identity systems capture more data than that. It's just literally 4 attributes. Because we really wanted to keep identity as just merely showing, are you who you say you are, and an authentication layer on top of it, a verifiable credential on top of it, and then they can use it. So minimization, data minimization is a very critical design pattern that we have applied. And the second one is decentralization. If you look at our healthcare data or healthcare network or our financial data, what we have done is that there is no single system that actually pools all that data together. So the exchange is actually peer-to-peer. What it means is that if you go to a bank and transact with the bank, the data resides where the transactions occur. And obviously, the hospital or the bank you went to has a copy of the data, and you get a copy of the data. No other system in this in India has any collect or pools any of this data. Okay, personal data. And now it's up protected under the Personal Data Protection Act, DPDP, Data Protection Act of India. So this decentralization of data sources, but using a protocol allowing me to take that data, a copy of the data, and to present for a second opinion of another doctor, for example. If you want a second opinion of that doctor, you need that data, but you don't want a central system to actually exchange that data, because now central system get to see everyone's data, right? And it creates cybersecurity risks. So data minimization, data decentralization is the 2 biggest patterns that we have done. And the third pattern we have done is all personal data is actually moves only with the consent, digital consent. India is one of the countries that actually implemented digital consent artifact and separated consent from the data flow. If you look at our account aggregator architecture, you will see this. Whether the data flow is from your bank to maybe you're applying for a loan, so banks to a lender, you can move with your consent, but the consent management is actually separated out. Why? Because people who want the data ask you the consent, it's pretty straightforward that they will put a complex consent and you sort of don't say, I don't care, I agree, right? So in the sense, if your consent is not separated out, there is no independent view of what you're consenting to. And so and the ability to revoke and ability to pause the consent. For example, if I've given a recurring consent for a lender and I want to be able to pause it or revoke it, I should be able to revoke it. So India has done, interestingly, these 3 patterns of data minimization, data decentralization, and data flow with only with the consent, and that also digital consent artifact. So some good architecture principle, but nothing of this can still stop from potential vulnerabilities in those hospitals, in those banks, wherever data is actually residing. Because when you are transacting in a digital world, every system has, airports have a copy of it, airlines have a copy, somebody, because you are transacting in many systems. That means we expect all those hundreds of systems to protect our data. That sometimes gets hard because much of the systems are typical IT security principles and so on. And it's only so much. Cybersecurity guys are getting smarter and smarter. So we look forward to newer patterns and designs for isolating personal data, anonymizing or vaulting personal data, creating data vaults that where the algorithm can go to data rather than data starting to move all over the place. Many of those, computational techniques, some of you may be working through. may be very, very useful in the future for us.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on your notion about zero knowledge. So with the three principles you just mentioned, particular data minimization, at least in other parts of the world, zero knowledge is used to prove things about your identity without revealing any other identifiers and so forth. To what extent do you see those techniques being useful in the systems you're building?
So we are very early. I don't think we have implemented advanced zero knowledge proof techniques yet. It's also to do with the fact that current systems like banking systems or insurance systems or hospital systems that you individuals interact with every day, neither the individuals are, with 1.4 billion people with extreme diversity in literacy rate and capability and capacity as they have, plus the current systems, digital systems, nobody is fully ready for that kind of advanced techniques, but doesn't mean we should not work on it. So we are applying some of this because we are flipping the data and credentialing and giving back to the user. Both, if you look at our wallet architecture and internet architecture, you would see the user-centric. So when user starts to control those assets, that's where we have the opportunity to actually implement, zero knowledge proofs. Because once I have my credentials or data in my wallet, in my control, in my vault, I could now start off. If I have a good vault provider or a wallet provider, I could now start imagining possibilities that I don't need to give the entire data. I can simply answer questions based on what the accepting party wants to know about me. So I think once we flip the model from a system-centric data model to a user-centric data and asset model, and with a good vault or a wallet-like providers who are in the industry, we could now imagine that these providers will start protecting my data better and providing more, zero knowledge proof capabilities. And when that becomes popular, banking systems can ask, or check into a hotel can actually ask, are you an Indian resident and are you an adult? That's good enough. And do you have a government approved ID? Just give me yes or no. And it's good enough for me to actually get you into my hotel, for example. Some of that will play through only when the model flips to user, and then good products, commercial products like vault and wallet providers start coming into the play. When that starts happening, I as an individual will have better control and better choice of how I want to expose my data. So we look forward to many of that. And I don't think we have done much with that at all yet. Except in identity a little bit, but very little. But we could see that through almost this architecture should be so amenable, friendly to move towards that, because we are giving the data back to the user. Now it's a question of a user using a good product to protect the data and ensure data is not being sent around, rather answers are being sent around. So it'll be a good something to watch for. And you guys are the experts. So I look forward to a lot of learning and tools and techniques and products and so on. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one last question, if any.
Okay, Jay, I want to hold you up. I know that you're on a clock. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.